Hello, I'm Terrence McNally, and welcome to today's podcast. I haven't done a lot about the election on this show. I've been talking more about the sort of foundational issues that underlie the situation that we find ourselves in. An age of highly imperfect politics, government, finance, and business, such that our democracy and our governance are dominated by a handful of billionaires, and then below them a number of multimillionaires and their corporations who do not share the interests of the larger society. But in early September, I read a piece by Tom Hayden at truthout.com, and over the next several days it appeared all over the progressive blogosphere, titled Saving Obama, Saving Ourselves. And I immediately contacted Tom to come on and talk about the election. We decided to do it now so that we're one's mind at a point when people's minds are focused on the vote that they're about to make and that their friends and relatives around the country are about to make. Among other things, Tom reminds us of the accomplishments of the first Obama administration in light of the actual political and economic circumstances he faced, and also he looks at history to take lessons from previous social movements. How did they interact with the political process in pursuit of their goals? And what did they gain or sacrifice in that process? Tom reminds us, quote, by their nature, the achievements of social movements are lesser versions of original visions. And I think that's really an important idea to keep in mind. Who are we at this moment in relationship to our political process when a huge number of those in our citizenry who are actually interested in politics and interested in current affairs, so these are not the disinclined, the disengaged, but that a large number of those are drawn to Fox and right-wing radio, so that their energy and their efforts end up not being focused on actually moving the larger society forward. That's the context I think we find ourselves in. Tom Hayden, a founding member of the Students for Democratic Society and an author of its visionary call, the Port Huron Statement, served 18 years in the California legislature and is founder and director of the Peace and Justice Resource Center. He currently writes for The Nation and is the author or editor of 19 books, including The Lost Gospel of the Earth, the Port Huron Statement, and his latest two, The Long Sixties, from 1960 to Barack Obama, and about to be released, Inspiring Participatory Democracy, Student Movements from Port Huron to Today. And after over 50 years of activism, politics, and writing, Hayden is still a leading voice for ending the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Pakistan, for erasing sweatshops, for saving the environment, and reforming politics through a more participatory democracy. Welcome, Tom Hayden.
Hey, Terrence, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm good. As I said, when I read that article, I said, okay, if I'm going to do a show about the election, about the choices we're facing, I really like the way that you laid it in a historical context and personal experience and all of that. Now, as you know, I like listeners to get to know the people behind the ideas and the work that we talk about. So your latest book, as I said, is about participatory democracy, basically from the Port Huron Statement to Occupy Wall Street, if you will. What was your personal path to the Port Huron Statement?
Well, I was an editor of the University of Michigan Daily as the 60s turned, and I was a little bit influenced culturally by Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and the Beat Generation, but I was really challenged by the students who were sitting in at lunch counters and freedom rides in the South, mainly black, because unlike the Beat Generation, which kind of cast the world as insane, the students in the South had found a purpose in their life worth dying for. They wanted to do something, and they were bold, and I fell in love with them. I simply it was not an overnight conversion by any means. I was a journalist, a reporter, still am. But as I covered them, I began to feel uncomfortable writing about them instead of joining them. So that would have been the beginning, and at the time there was fledgling effort to start a national student organization, unheard of in those days. to be called Students for Democratic Society. It needed a mission statement, as you would describe it today. I was told to draft it. I did. It was a mere 25,000 words, and it was adopted at quite an inspirational convention attended by about 60 people on the shores of Lake Huron at a labor center that belonged to the United Auto Workers. That's why it became known as the Port Huron Statement.
Okay. Now, we may return to your new book and a bit of a conversation about the Occupy and 99% movements, but as I said, let's focus on the election and your article, Saving Obama, Saving Ourselves. Its first words, quote, "The threat of a Romney-Ryan regime should be enough to convince a narrow American majority to vote for Barack Obama, including the disappointed rank and file of social movements." Now, we'll go into elements of this in more depth, but briefly, your brief answer as to why.
Well, this election is similar to many we've had that are settled by marginal differences. Does anybody doubt that there was a difference between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon? That was settled by as close a margin back 50 years ago as this one will be settled today if the election were held today. It may widen one way or the other before the election, but I think that Romney is another version of the Trojan horse for Paul Ryan, future president, the Tea Party, future congressional majority, and the neoconservatives, the former Democrats turned Republicans, hawkish, pro-war, manipulated us into Iraq. And I have to say, watching them for 50 years, that the Republicans have a long game. They have a strategy, and it is they know that they can't elect the Tea Party, but they know that they don't just want power for its own sake. They want to dismantle the social welfare state and escalate the national security state. They know that's unpopular, and so their best bet is Romney, who was the governor of liberal Massachusetts. And to make sure that Romney is tethered to their agenda, they forced him to pick Ryan as the vice president, and that got the right wing on board. So anybody that doesn't see that, and there are a lot of people that don't see that, they obviously people would prefer to believe that the smiling Mitt Romney is a moderate rather than think that he's a guy that is hiding an extremely reactionary force trying to take over the American government. There's a lot of people that prefer that kind of psychology. But I think anybody who's clear-headed should see that Obama's right when he says they'll take us backward. There's no question about that.
Yeah. Okay. And then, after saying, the negative, people should vote against a Romney-Ryan regime, that should lead them to vote for Obama, you also say, but the positive case for more Obama and better Obama should be made as well. Again, not going into the details, but briefly, that positive case.
Well, let me just add one other negative, then
Sure.
Turn it into the positive.
Yeah.
I think what most people do not know, including Pacifica listeners, is that Romney has delegated the task of choosing his Supreme Court nominees, if he's elected president, to Robert Bork, who is about as reactionary and angry a man in the American judicial history. So they have the Supreme Court in mind. That alone is one reason to vote for Obama, because his Supreme Court nominees have been fair to excellent. I'd say Sotomayor is excellent, and the next president will get one or two. And as you can see with the Citizen United case on the role of corporate money in politics, you can see with affirmative action, you can see with the Voting Rights Act, all of these Republican objectives can and will be achieved by the courts over the next several years if Romney is elected president.
Okay, let me cut in there for a couple of reasons. One, I want to say that when anyone asks me, whether they should vote a third party, whether they should stay at home because Obama hasn't done enough, I say two words: Supreme Court. And I had the kind of frightening thing of stopping mentioning to someone in a motion picture line, and this person who looked to be progressive, West Side, going to a documentary, someone who you think, and he says, "Oh, are they on the ballot too?" Which just shows how we fail to teach physics. And I had to explain to him that they're not, but two of them will be, will be appointed probably, and that sort of got him. Let me also tell people, I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with Tom Hayden. His two most recent books are The Long Sixties, from 1960 to Barack Obama, and Inspiring Participatory Democracy, Student Movements, from Port Huron to Today. We're talking about the upcoming election, and to learn more, you can go to Tom Hayden, Hayden, that's one word, tomhayden.com. Tom.
You've got it covered, Terrence.
There you go. You get it all down fast.
I'll give you two other words: nuclear war. Who would you trust with the nuclear war question? President Obama, or it'll be like the Cuban Missile Crisis with Romney, where the military will definitely be in the initiative. Somehow these issues don't ever make their way into presidential debates or elections. Supreme Court, nuclear war. There's other things that are ignored. But you had asked about the
positive.
Yeah, I think the positive has to be seen kind of from the perspective of social movements. What's gained and what's lost? Because after all, your listeners and like myself are not in presidential circles. That's not how we see history happening. But I would say if we look at the cases of, for example, Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy, just to take three clear examples, there were movements that were considered extreme or militant or ahead of their times. The slave uprisings, the abolitionist movement, the factory sit-downs in the 1930s, the occupiers during the Great Depression, the students and civil rights activists at the beginning of the Kennedy years, and they became forces to be reckoned with. And for whatever reason you like to believe, they were able to gain concessions from power. In which the presidents had a personal role because they didn't have to make these concessions, I would say. But these kind of gains are inch by inch. They're painful. They involve a lot of sacrifices, a lot of setbacks, and they can be easily rolled back. I would say our sacred ground is the ground of reforms that have been achieved. For example, if I were a UCLA student from Mexico, undocumented, I would be battling to elect Obama because he issued that executive order, which pretty much provides amnesty for the DREAM Act eligible young people in the country. And if somebody on the far left said, well, but he's also deported more people than anybody in history, I would say that's true too. We're looking at what we've gained, and we don't want to lose it. So it's all about having a perspective on what's been gained. In the case of the anti-war movement, I think we've gained the end of the war in Iraq, and that is significant in terms of the loss of life, the loss of the waste of tax dollars. And some will say, yeah, but he's escalated the drone war. That's true, and we will end the drone war. as rapidly as we can. But one of the lessons I've noticed is that almost no gain that you're proud of comes without the other side taking a pound of flesh too. I think that's why it's so difficult for people to gauge progress when they're in the middle of it.
Yeah, that line that I quoted about by their nature, the achievements of social movements are lesser versions of original visions. Those who work the most passionately and the longest and the hardest for the reform are naturally disappointed in the form it finally takes.
I think that's correct. And history is no consolation, but history is instructive in that regard. I can give you 20 or 30 examples of reforms that were achieved by the 60s movements with the involvement of politicians like the late George McGovern, who passed this week. McGovern was a politician. McGovern wanted to be president. McGovern introduced the McGovern-Hatfield resolution in the Senate, which would cut off funding for the Indochina War. It lost, but it rallied support. Jane Fonda and I campaigned for it all across the country in 1972. McGovern lost the election, but the cause, partly propelled by McGovern, eventually did prevail.
Yeah, let me just cut in there. In other words, one of the things I worked in Los Angeles County running an assembly district for the McGovern campaign myself. One of the things there is that for those people who didn't know exactly where they were or what they could stand for or what was possible, the fact that McGovern won that nomination and ran on that peace platform, I think one of the things we talk about in this whole conversation is it moves the center.
It did. You can look at my obituary on Senator McGovern if you go to tomhayden.com. It did move the center. People actually forget how far things moved. In fact, I would argue that McGovern as a politician was premature. He opened. He's considered woolly-headed liberal dreamer, but he's actually quite shrewd. He headed the commission in the Democratic Party to reform the rules. That's why we have presidential primaries. That's why half the delegates more or less have to be women. That's why Jesse Jackson replaced Mayor Daley as a delegate in that convention. And that's why the AFL-CIO, connected to the CIA, opposed McGovern, endorsed Nixon, and acted as a spoiler in the whole process. And it was because the McGovern forces were in a sense peaking too soon.
Mm-hmm.
So I've adopted since I was a very young man a particular stance on these questions that I recommend to others. I'm not only a participant in, but I'm a student of the process. I think there's no more important process than the linkage between social movements and politics, and it's actually completely fascinating to get the story straight. As you look at it one way when you're in the thick of it, and then later you look at it differently. I mean, does anybody today remember how Eugene McCarthy and Robert Kennedy people hated each other in 1968? Does anybody look back on, anymore on Robert Kennedy and think, that he was a
opportunistic
fascist?
Yeah.
No, it's
McCarthy lawyer. Yeah.
It's so hard to get a grip.
In the middle of it.
It's like reading a book when you're young, when you're middle-aged, when you're old. You get three different perspectives on what happened. So it's hard to judge Obama in mid-course. But I do think, for example, no one seems to know that in the much maligned stimulus package, there's tens of billions of dollars that go into weatherization and insulation and renewable resources, wind, solar, and energy efficiency, combined with the almost doubling of fuel efficiency standards on American automobiles by Obama. It adds up to, 10, 20, 30 times more for alternative energy than was achieved by Clinton trying to squeeze out what he could when he was president.
Right. In other words,
it's invisible because people are guilty about government spending. I don't know why it's invisible. The Democrats partly hide their achievements, and why should it be up to local citizens to find out the truth? But if you find it out, there's quite a bit in that stimulus package that together is more than has been achieved in the past 20 years in alternative energy.
Yeah, let me actually jump off on that, because I found that one of the most significant chunks of your article, and obviously this notion that the stimulus package, what I think people on the left progressive side have heard more than anything else is Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman saying it was too small, and
right.
And then on the right that it was that it was government takeover and so on. I'm going to read one paragraph from your letter, because it's a quote, basically a summarization from Michael Grunwald's book. That's Grunwald. He has a book called The New Deal, which is an in-depth analysis of the stimulus program, below the rhetoric, below the labels. Grunwald sums up as follows. The Obama Recovery Act, in constant dollars, was the biggest and most transformative energy bill in U.S. history, the biggest and most transformative education bill since the Grand Society, a big and transformative health care bill, the biggest foray into industrial policy in the auto bailout since FDR, the biggest expansion of anti-poverty programs since LBJ, the biggest middle-class tax cut since Ronald Reagan, the biggest infusion of research money ever, and an extended high-speed internet to underserved communities, a twist on the New Deal rural electrification program, and it contained virtually no earmarks. This is something people have either never known or long forgotten.
And why is that, do you suppose?
Good question. I do think that Obama and his administration have, as he said, and I'm going to read a quote from Obama in a second to back me up here, have been miserable failures at telling their story, and that this stimulus bill was only looked at as something to slow down the free fall of the economy, and only the right looked at the specifics and said, lies like that it was $90 billion for clean energy and that half of the companies that were helped out went bankrupt, when in fact it's 3 out of 36. But when you've heard this quote, but last July in an interview with Charlie Rose, Obama said, and I'm going to quote him, "The mistake of my first couple of years was thinking that this job was just about getting the policy right. And that's important, but the nature of this office is also to tell a story to the American people that gives them a sense of unity and purpose and optimism, especially during tough times." And I think that a story could have been made. Once you've passed the stimulus package, don't let it just be about did it reach the predicted number of jobs added. But say that, as he says now in the campaign, we seized an opportunity in a crisis to redirect our economy into an economy for the 21st century to compete with Germany and China. And that's why we gave money to education. That's why we gave money to clean energy. That's why we improved our infrastructure, because we had been ignoring these things while fighting 2 wars and giving lots of tax cuts. And we were going to seize this opportunity, and it was going to do what people said it did, which is slow down that free fall. But 2, it was going to be a shift in direction into the future.
Well, I think that's fair enough. I'm not clear why the mainstream media never really described it. It could be that they're interested in gotcha stories or sensations, so they'll get into the alleged scandal about one solar company. But you and I don't rely on the mainstream media, so it was even kind of ignored in the independent media. It could be that it's too dense, it's too complicated. We're caught up in drama, and new light bulbs are not drama. I don't know what it was.
Well, it's interesting what you say, Tom, because as I pointed out, I said maybe the flaw was a failure of storytelling, but then, as you just said, storytelling likes conflict. Storytelling can work for you, it can work against you, and I think you're right that to have said, by the way, did you notice, that it was an energy bill, that it was a green tech bill, I think wasn't a hot enough story.
And our leading economists on the liberal side, for example, Krugman, they tend to be trained economists who see things in terms of Keynesianism versus free markets and supply side and so on. And they're not very political, so they thought from an economist viewpoint that Obama should have doubled the amount in the stimulus when that's all he could get through the Congress. I mean, the Congress is worse on these issues for the most part than Obama. But so we were led to believe that it was just a token amount of money, and that that's because we relied too much on the judgment of economists on our side. Nevertheless, I think you're right that for reasons that I don't know what the real reasons were, but Obama failed to tell that story. I think it might be that he was advised by his advisors and Democrats that if you tell the story, we'll lose all these congressional elections by even a bigger margin because the voters don't want big government spending. So he was hemmed in by public opinion, by voter opinion, from emphasizing his own achievements.
Yeah, let me just mention
what a weird world.
Yeah, let me just mention two things that I assume you are aware of, which are the failure of that kind of analysis by his people, if it were so. And one is that in the stimulus package, as you know, Obama bargained away, the Democrats bargained away $40 billion in aid to states in exchange in their negotiations with Republicans, and then brought the bill forward, having cut out these $40 billion to states, and got not one Republican vote.
Didn't get it anyway, right?
If I were advising that day, I would have said the day after that vote, in which we get none, bring up a bill that's just those $40 billion for the states, and know that you're not going to get any Republican votes, and see if you can pass that, which says this is, two sides can play this game. As we know, the bankruptcy of the states and the firing of public employees has been an unending nightmare played out on the local level, which I think had a great deal to do with 2010. The other thing I would say was that when 2010 turned out the way it did, you heard Obama himself say, the sense of America, their feeling has changed. When in fact, I would say what changed was the electorate. And so the kinds of things that we're talking about, which is clean energy, education, these kinds of things, would have appealed perhaps to some of those young voters who sat out 2010.
Well, you got to play with the cards you're dealt.
I know.
And back to the first issue that you raised, I think this election is going to be settled by a 1% margin in a few states, and the question for Pacifica listeners, I think, is how to cast your vote sensibly and strategically. If you're in California, you can probably vote for anyone that you like, But if you're in Iowa or New Mexico or Ohio or Pennsylvania,
Nevada,
Wisconsin, you have to take responsibility for the fact that your vote could contribute, not be totally responsible for, but could contribute to the demise of Barack Obama and the election of Romney.
Now, when you say that 1%, let me ask you. I mean, one of the things that I have felt is that with the voter suppression that has been minimized a little bit by court decisions, but is still out there, and the I would expect an onslaught of advertising in the last few days, I think, and perhaps even some electronic voting issues and so on, that I think a 1%, that he needs. That what scares me is that he needs a healthy margin to sustain a narrow margin, if you will.
Right, I think that's probably true. I can't speculate on outcomes. That's the job of talk radio, because it kind of drives me crazy.
Exactly.
I'm watching data that shows that it'll be a tie, electoral tie, and go to the House of Representatives.
Oh my God!
but all I'm saying is that it's clear that Obama has had a part in disillusioning some of his base. It's also clear that it means that those people have a choice to sit it out or vote for a third party, and I guess believe they have nothing to do with the outcome, or believe that Obama deserves to lose. But the Green Party and the other third parties, they're going to get more than 1% of the vote, and I can hear people now saying that if Obama loses the election by 1%, it's his fault. Well, it's certainly partly his fault, but we all have a part to play. We all have responsibility, and this is a mess. This electoral system, with our electoral college, with the role of money, with the barriers to full participation in voting, but again and again, I've seen in my lifetime, it comes down to these incredibly tight elections. Take Gore versus Bush. Bush equals bad Supreme Court and war in Iraq. Gore, we don't know what he would have done, but he would have tested the possibilities of an environmental presidency.
Yes.
That was a big deal. So big that I think a lot of people are still burned by it, or traumatized by it, or troubled by it. And it is repeating itself once again before our eyes right here.
Yeah, and the other thing, you said a bad Supreme Court, but lest anyone forget, Alito and Roberts, appointed by Bush, are, Roberts more than anyone, responsible for Citizens United, responsible for what we're watching today.
Yeah.
Anybody who couldn't force themselves to hold their nose, if that's what it would have taken, and vote for Gore, knows that democracy has been hurt drastically by their decision multiplied by a million or so. I just saw one other thing I took from your article. It's going back a second, but when we talked about the stimulus package, and you had the note that a CBS New York Times poll in February 2010, so this is after the stimulus is passed and before the 2010 elections, revealed that only 6% of Americans believe the stimulus had created any jobs. 6%. Oh, it's just crazy.
No, it's true. It's a lot of we're bedeviled by a lot of optical illusions and perception problems, and I can't really explain why only 6% thought it created any jobs. It cannot be just that Obama did a bad job of telling the story.
And given that it's
nothing to do with the American head.
Yeah, given that it's that low, it can't just be that Fox News and Rush Limbaugh did a good job of denying it. That might explain 15% or 20%, but not 6%.
No, it's like those right-wingers running around, down with government, save my Social Security.
Yeah.
I at least know that the Social Security card in my pocket came from the New Deal, came from the government. But the political culture is so twisted and polluted, thank God for Pacifica, but you really have to cut your way through swamps of misinformation, and it's no wonder that people are just puzzled about this stuff. I do think that, like on Afghanistan and on Iraq, there's no question that Romney is advised by Dan Senior, who was the public relations spin artist for the Iraq regime that we installed. There's no question that Romney's advisors are the neocons that brought us the Iraq war. And yet one has the hardest time getting that news out to people, which in turn allows Romney to seem to be a smiling moderate who agrees that these wars were a bad idea. That's why I think thinking about Romney as a Trojan horse for very malign forces, the Tea Party and the neocons, is the best way to look at what's going on. If you look at Romney's face and his mouth and his eyes and listen to his words, you're being misled.
Yeah.
You're just being misled. And people will say the same thing about Obama. Okay, I'll concede that that's the way it is. But if you look at who are the forces behind the contending candidates, it's just not true that they're all the same. One is almost entirely white, for example, just to take the most glaring difference between the constituencies, and the other isn't. One is more from the past, and the other...
Wait, you're disappearing, and I don't know why.
Well,
you're back.
I just think what you want to look at quite often, since the words are propagandistic, are what are the constituent forces on the two sides? For instance, the people who are most against Obama on the left, generally, and I know I'm going to anger some of your listeners, are white people who are disconnected from organizations that have a stake in outcomes.
Well, at the time of this article,
they're all for Romney. What is the white male support for a Romney now? 75%? I don't know. 95 to nothing among blacks.
That's what that's the quote I was going to get.
75 to 25 among Latinos. So if you think, I've actually heard people tell me, friends of ours, that those people of color are misled. This is a righteous white Green Party advocate, and I said that's elitist. She'd go vote for whoever she wants to in California. That's fine, but I do think if you're interested in social change, it takes coalitions, and there ought to be some respect and recognition for where the preponderance of the voters are going. Black people, Latinos, environmentalists, women, students, young people, senior citizens, Jewish voters. They're going to Obama. Are they all misled?
Right.
No. They have a concept of their interests? Yes. Do you want to change their concept and so to speak radicalize them? Fine, but you have to start with where they are and argue. And the one thing I believe those people do not want to hear is that they're retro they're ignorant, and that the only way forward is to pay back Obama by electing Romney. Then they'll think you're crazy, and then you'll come to them wanting to organize a coalition after the election, and they say, "Aren't you the people that were telling me not to vote for Obama?" It just I don't think it's simple, but I would say that's the decisive thing. What side are you on? And those who say both candidates are the same are ignoring, the sort of social and economic differences between the bases of the two parties.
Right. A quote you had that sort of summarized some of what you're saying right here is, if Obama loses, it will be unfair to blame the left, but they will be blamed nonetheless. But as a consequence of his loss and their being blamed, they will become more marginal and far less able to connect with the progressive constituencies you were talking about and be able to build mass movements that you would hope would continue what emerged under the Occupy 99% movement, or, as you said, as I quoted you earlier, not just more Obama the next 4 years, but a better Obama that can be supported by mass movements. In other words, in your look at the interplay between movements and electoral politics, that's part of it, right? You have to be able to build to push. And I've talked about it many times on this station, probably starting in '92 with Clinton's election. But
how's that been going, Terrence?
Huh?
How's your push been going?
The FDR said, "Make me do it." As you point out, Kennedy faced 200,000 people in demonstrating in Washington. Politicians can be moved, but if you alienate yourself from the constituencies that allowed you to build that mass movement, or if you elect someone who is in direct opposition to whatever you want, forget about it.
Yeah, then you have to wait. And it's a lot because of the media. I think a lot of rebellious people think of themselves more as performance artists, and the projection of images, the use of YouTube, it's somewhat disconnected from public opinion. Sometimes you have to antagonize public opinion in order to make a point. It's true, but as much as possible, protests should be aimed at persuasion, don't you think? And if it's all about performance, being spectacular, getting ratings,
getting hits, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're in that mode, you may not be measuring how many people you've turned off.
Yeah.
You just don't, because it doesn't. It's all about building a base for your performance art instead of building a base for a policy agenda.
Yeah, and that difference of that performance is instantaneous. There's no delayed gratification involved in your performance. Whereas, as we've said, that slow, gradual, compromising movement toward reform is not nearly as attractive at certain times. One thing I wanted to do, Tom, let me just say, what we're talking about here, as we've said a couple of times, listeners, is in California, and I can't advocate for any candidate, but in California, it's pretty clear which side will win, and so your vote may not have the negative effect that it might have somewhere else. But but people can get on the phone, can sit in Culver City, and can call Wisconsin, and can call Nevada, and can call New Mexico. People can do some grassroots organizing from this state, which is a foregone conclusion, to influence things in other states. Would you talk a little bit about that?
They can do that, and they'd have to go to the California Obama website or to the County Federation of Labor or their local Democratic club to find out how to do that. You're right. They also, because my wife did this 4 years ago, and others are doing it this year, a lot of people like going to Nevada and going door to door in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And
you can't do it. You can't do it all day and all night. You might have to,
No, but it seems
do.
To have
No,
some
I'm joking. I'm saying you might be able to have some fun at night, but you can make a difference during the day.
You can Also, you can go to New Mexico. You can go to Colorado. So you can actually travel to these places
that are in among those three states: Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, all among the most crucial swing states.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's going to win. That Obama's going to win all three of them, but he has to win two of them.
Yeah, and I also wanted to just mention, in terms of perhaps motivating folks to take some of those actions, some of the things that you pointed out. We talked about the stimulus package that had gone under the radar, but one that I found quite interesting was when you looked at what the actual accurate level of disengagement from Iraq is at this point, because I think the common wisdom, the conventional wisdom on the left is between contractors and remaining forces, we're still there. And you had some very surprising statistics. If you have them at your ready, I will let you do it, but otherwise I'll read what you said.
Go ahead.
This is a quote from your article. In June of this year, there were 1,235 U.S. government civilian employees in Baghdad, down 10% from 3 months ago, along with 12,477 employees of U.S.-funded contractors and grantees, down 26% since the last quarter. You make the point that in South Korea has numbers equal to or larger than that. Other countries do, that it is not the huge remaining force that many assume it to be.
Right, that's true, but where does the truth get you? People will respond and say, well, that Obama didn't do that. He was forced to do that by the Iraqis. And then you get into this endless discussion, and people are citing the New York Times, and then other people are saying, yeah, but the New York Times reporter is a CIA agent, Michael Gordon. It's just hopeless. I've realized it's very akin to our inability to explain clearly what the stimulus package achieved and what it didn't achieve, because people have, on the left, on the right, they have blinders through which they see everything. So if somebody says, isn't the Iraq war over, there still are a significant number of people who say, oh no, the war is going on. And I have no way of knowing how many people that is, but all I try to provide is a perspective that is driven by facts and the interpretation of what the facts mean. And we are down to a low number of personnel in Iraq, so low that it's reasonable to expect that there'll be an attack on the American embassy.
and then we'll be,
Then we'll go again, right.
Exactly, and then you'll be in trouble for having reduced it too much.
The other thing that's interesting, if you dwell only in Pacifica world, is how little feedback I get anyway of people being glad the Iraq war is over. And I suppose that was such a bitter experience, the war, the bloodshed, the cost, the contractors, the lies, the disillusionment, the long effort to persuade members of Congress to cast a vote against further spending, that people can't really feel that it was an achievement because it came at such a high price in suffering. And I understand that. That, again, is one of the things you find in the study of social movements, that there's little solace sometimes in winning because of the pain you've gone through.
Yeah. One of the things you pointed out also is when you were analyzing sort of why things went wrong was that Obama came into office illegitimate by the Tea Party types and a certain amount, a little not wholly enthusiastically by Hillary Clinton Democrats, and not rallying those who had been with him for the long slog because they were absolutely fatigued. So this is, I mean, I'm just saying in terms of movements, that was a player. One thing towards the end of your article, you say there's plenty of time to still make a difference, and you list three things. One, some people on the left will have to become used to the idea that partial power brings partial results. Any comment?
It's been my experience. It's the pound of flesh argument. As long as you can't overthrow the system and have a total revolution, whatever that means, whatever you gain comes at a price. It doesn't mean that that progress is meaningless, but it kind of deflates you when you succeed, and it ignites passion on the other side because they perceive it as a loss. But partial gains and partial power are the only possibilities at this point for the left.
Right. And then you say, second, self-defined radicals need to be immersed in the everyday problems of the mass constituencies that depend on presidents to make a small margin, those partial victories, a small margin of difference in their lives.
Yeah, if you take LAPD, the police department reform, the actual story is interesting because when Clinton was president, and remember when he was pushing the more police on the streets and the hard line against juvenile predators and so on, he had this big bill for law enforcement to prove that he was tough on crime. And Al Sharpton was in the room and started yelling that this was all police and no reform. And so Clinton put in language that allowed the Justice Department to bring cases against corrupt or brutal police departments if there was, quote, a pattern and practice of discrimination that violated the Constitution. And that pattern and practice language is what allowed the federal government, the Justice Department, to bring the case against the LAPD and make the LAPD enter into its agreement to reform itself after 30 years in LA. And in the Bush versus Gore election, Bush was in favor of retaining that policy, and Gore was for taking away the power of the federal Justice Department to reform local police departments. That's why I supported Gore. Nader couldn't help on that matter. It was either going to be police reform was going to be accomplished because Gore was president and the law was retained, or not. So these are the kind of things, if you look from the ground up, you see, well, which of these guys is going to do something on what I really, really care about? Not on everything I care about, but at least they're not going to make things worse, and hopefully they're going to allow us to move forward, like these DREAM Act students.
Absolutely.
It's painful. Obama it's true, he's deported more people than any other president, but it's also true that the DREAM Act students have achieved an executive order from Obama which will allow more to stay in this country than he's deported.
Yeah.
So and Romney is going to unravel that. So if you look at it from that perspective, there's no debate. You just have to continue holding on to what you've achieved and pushing further.
And
if
as you
you're
say,
disconnected and you've got nothing at stake specifically, then you're like a free radical.
Yeah, and let me just, the third thing that you say in that point, and I'm going to close it so you don't have time to comment on this, is election seasons are perfect organizing moments. Large numbers of people are thinking about these things. They're open to persuasion. It may be springtime before the next cycle of activism comes around again. Now is the time to build local lists and structures for voter turnout in November and street turnout thereafter. Thank you to Tom Hayden, and as always, keep up your good work.
Terrence, thanks. I'll see you in the streets long about December, January.
There you got it. Okay, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.